Welcome back to another episode of Opal Wave MTG, a channel dedicated to exploring power levels in EDH. I'm your host Jacob, and this is going to be the final episode for our deck tech series on Evelyn the Covetous. For the glory version of Evelyn, I figured I would bring in probably one of the most prominent Grixis brewers in the CEDH scene to talk about this really sweet vampire. Alchmyst is an admin for the CEDHU, which is a Discord dedicated to helping new players figure out what deck they should be playing in CEDH and giving them the tools to understand the metagame. He is also a tournament organizer for Eminence Gaming. He is a moderator for the Grixis Mean Girls Discord server, and he is on staff for the CEDH event hub. Alchemist, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to talk about Evelyn. Something I've talked about for several months, but this is a new format for me.
Awesome. So let's go ahead and review Evelyn real quick. So Evelyn is a 5-mana Grixis, which is red, black, and blue vampire rogue with flash. Whenever Evelyn the Covetous or another vampire enters the battlefield under your control, exile the top card of each player's library with a collection counter on it. Once each turn, you may play a card from exile with a collection counter on it if it was exiled by an ability you controlled, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast it. So Grixis is generally considered one of the best colors in CEDH. What sets Evelyn apart from other Grixis commanders?
It's an interesting thing, right? Because you always get, especially from like the older players that still swear by Kess and Jaliva, which yes, I set up my own pivot point here, where before this set came out, I'm gonna walk back to what feels like years ago, but was due to the overload of products coming out from Wizards. I was asked, hey, Alk, there's a new set coming out. We're going back to shards finally. This is all you. What are you hyped for? What do you want most? And I said two things. I want a Grixis mana dork of some kind, and which I got with Cormella, which maybe we'll talk about another time. And I wanted a version of Jaliva that would work with flicker loops, which is exactly what we got for Evelyn. And so that is my argument for Evelyn above Jaliva. In general, the benefit she provides is, in addition to your standard win cons in Grixis, right? You have what I would argue are the two most efficient, easiest win cons in the game within the Grixis colors. You have Thoracle Console and you have your Breach Loops. You also get access to, depending on your build, a variety of different combo lines with Evelyn. You could, I don't necessarily advise overloading your deck with combo pieces to the point where your hands all halves to different combos, but because of her tech specifically, that it's an ETB trigger. It's not a cast trigger, it's just the ETB. You can use stuff like Baron Dockside, Lord Dracus Dockside, Cloudstone Curio Dockside. I swear Dockside is a completely balanced card.
Yeah, as we've seen,
Yeah.
I've done a good bit of Grixis deck techs on this channel, and generally when I'm brewing deck Grixis, it's like a lot of the combos are like some form of Dockside combo.
Yeah, well, I do like it because I feel, not to get too off track, but I don't actually see it as much of a problem as some people do, because I feel like it gave a lot of colors and decks another option for a win con that they didn't otherwise have. But there are ones you can do in Evelyn that aren't Dockside. So like we've already been just like talking about just other combos she can do, right? You can also do like Narumeha flicker loops and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And what this deck is all built around, that I was getting to, is the Worldgorger Dragon Loop, because it does not, you can just keep flickering her, bringing her in and back. Flicker is a stretch of a term here, in case any of the very technical players get upset with that wording, where it exiles and then comes back. over and over again, and each time it does that, you're exiling a card off each library, which we'll get to later in the actual like mechanics of this, I guess. But what I found really cool about that is not only do we now have a Worldgorger Dragon commander for Grixis, which is huge because, you know, the most common ones you probably are used to seeing are like Croxa or Jeska Armix, and they're great, but they're limited. It's a lot riskier. Worldgorger Dragon is one of the most risky combos you can possibly do because if they snipe down the Worldgorger, BTFO. Like,
You're dead on. Yeah, you're dead.
Yeah. The addition of blue, you're now protecting that combo in a way you were never able to do before. And so that already for me is a major plus on not just like a benefit that this has over other Grixis decks, but has over the entire, I think it revolutionized the entire pool of Worldgorger Dragon decks to begin with, that it even existed. And in addition to that, she's got a wall of text on her, but she's got 5 letters to start that off. Flash.
Yeah.
And her mana cost is 2 colorless, a hybrid pip, black, and another hybrid pip. Meaning she can be cast solely with black mana. Eve, because she has flash, you can start your combo and flash her out. Meaning the only mana you actually need to be able to produce before you start doing this is enough mana to cast Animate Dead, which is 2. So you could, realistically, you could play a black producing land on turn 1, Entomb the Worldgorger, and turn 2, play any other mana source, and you're off to the races. The other thing is you're not just like milling your opponents, you're exiling those cards and you can cast them. So you now have an entire pool to play around with, including your own deck, which in this case, we do have various removal spells, meaning we don't have that other requirement Worldgorger decks typically need, where there needs to be a creature in a yard to end the loop so you don't draw the game. Here, we don't need that. We can just, if all else fails, we can just kill Evelyn and put her in the yard. Essentially, if you can't end the game by that point, like, you either are just missing a line because you're new to the deck, or something has gone horribly wrong. Like, maybe you did this after consulting down to find Animate Dead and you have 10 cards in your library and your opponents all brought interactionless decks. I don't know. But there, yeah, the situation where that comes up is thankfully very, very small. So yeah, I guess in summary, very long-winded way to answer your question, there's just so much she can do that I think a lot of Worldgorger Dragon decks were point A to point B and had to check a lot of boxes to get there, and I think she took away those checkpoints and just streamlined everything in a more protected package as well.
A really sweet reason to run Evelyn. I think it's I mean, even outside of the context of it just, you know, being that win condition, it just generates a ton of value on its own. And it having flash, like, you still get to play that play pattern of control where you don't have to like cast an Evelyn and then pass a turn. You can just like hold up your mana. At the end of the person before you's at their end step, you can just flash in the Evelyn. You know, essentially draw 4 cards with her ability, and then you could like just go from there, kind of a thing. So it's super sweet, super sweet.
Well, what I like about holding up the mana too is, like, again, it's like almost perfect, right? It's 5 mana. So you could be sitting there ready to do your Adnos and realize it's not the right call.
Oh yeah.
To go for the Adnos there. And normally you would just lose out. You would nothing to do. You're just gonna have stat a turn where you did not accelerate your board state, and you weren't able to cast your Adnos because your evaluation of the game state was that it wasn't safe to go for it. You can at the very least at least get Evelyn out, and that might be beneficial because you might be able to rob someone's like Imp Seal or something.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't think about that. That's because, like, if you're holding 5 mana, you're threatening that Adnos, and that might make players a little bit more cautious. They'll hold up their mana too, and you're just like, nah, just kidding. I'm gonna flash in an Evelyn, and then you get these cards. It's just really good. Also, being able to stop top of deck tutors like Worldly Tutor and Lighten Tutor, Imp Seal, like you said, Vampiric Tutor. That also seems really strong. Let's actually kind of get into the meat of it here. So we're gonna get to these creatures, and I've right off the bat I'm seeing pretty thin creature base here. I mean, obviously we've got some of the powerhouses in the format, stuff like Dothy Voidwalker. You talked about Dockside, even though we're not using it in a combo here. I don't think it's still just a really powerful card, something you definitely want to be running if you're on red and playing in CDH. Dragon's Rage Channeler is also another one that makes a lot of sense to me, since it's going to help you put that Worldgorger Dragon in the graveyard, which is where you want it to be. Then we've got Ragavan, which is probably... I'm actually curious about the inclusion of Ragavan here, since this is definitely more of a turbo strategy. Was there any specific reason why you wanted to run Ragavan? You just wanted something that could get you a little bit grindier, or what was your thought process here on that one?
I've been having a lot of success over the off of the turn one Ragavan plays and making the treasure. This is one of my decks that admittedly it could be cut in more than in others. Like I wouldn't cut it in, for example, Cormella. I just need the color fixing. Yeah, Ragavan keeps going in and out because originally, probably around the time that like Punt City would have been happening, where I was like kind of bouncing around ideas of what deck to bring for that. I think around that time Ragavan was out because I had been assuming that there was a lot of creature-based decks, and that's what I was facing a lot of the time, where Ragavan just wasn't going to get through. Nowadays, I've been playing into a lot of metas and stuff where I feel like I'm just hammering someone with Ragavan, because even if either a table or either a deck does not have like a creature heavy strategy to where I can get through on them, because even if they do have a creature, they really want to save it. My personal favorite that I've gotten a few people with is if there's like an oof or something, I'm like, I'll keep swinging at you. You either lose that oof or I'm gonna keep stealing your cards.
Right. So hey, you've got the blocker, and then we got Simian Spirit Guide. Pretty straightforward for just extra mana when you're doing your Adnos type of stuff. Thassa's Oracle, another pretty much auto include for these Grixis decks, since it's just such an efficient win con. And then we've got our Worldgorger Dragon. Now, I'm looking at these creatures, and I am seeing that we're missing a few. Most notably is the Opposition Agent, which I've seen a lot of turbo decks actually hop off of the Opposition Agent, and that's more of like a mid-range type of card. And then another one I'm not seeing is the Ledger Shredder, which it seems like another really great option with, kind of in the same vein as like Dragon's Rage Channeler, where it can help you get that Worldgorger Dragon in the graveyard. And I actually think you've got a sideboard here in this deck. I'm actually looking at it now, and I think, yeah, you do have the Ledger Shredder, you do have the Opposition Agent, and then there's also a Gilded Drake that's not included. And then also the Baron Master Wizard for the Dockside combo that you were talking about earlier. Is there any particular reason that you're not running these cards right now? Maybe these are cards that are going in and out. Maybe they swap in and out with like Ragavan or something?
Yeah, so you kind of hit the nail on the head with like turbo players as a whole. We've been moving away from Opposition Agent in a lot of lists. It's just not... Sometimes just holding up that 3 mana can be hard. I've actually been, and through the process of this conversation even more so, been deliberating adding opposition back in, similar to the thing we're talking about with Evelyn having flash. I really like the ability to just play my land and say, okay, bye. Have your turn. Go.
Right, yeah. It's just
like, I'll figure out what I want to do with you on the stack.
Right.
And so I think for that, Ragavan could potentially flex in and out depending on the meta, depending if I'm confident I can get through them. And then Ledger Shredder, Ledger Shredder, we were talking about this a bit before we started this, but Ledger Shredder is awesome when it's awesome. Like when it's hot, it's hot. But when it's not, it's not. And so there's two things. The easy thing to point out is that people might not actually be aware of is Connive is a must, not a may. Which means someone can really get you on a Thoracle consult play. Especially, I say consult intentionally here, because consult you have no choice but to empty your entire library. If you want to actually win there. Like, you can obviously name a card that's in your library, but there's no guarantee unless you big brained it because you just like, I don't know, resolved something that let you put cards on the bottom of your library. The other thing is like people aren't feeding it as much. At times, like it's either gonna get fed a ton or not really, and I found usually there's not a situation where all 3 players are gonna feed it, and you get a lot of games now where, especially, it's meta dependent, but I'd say more often than not, you do get games where you're expecting to see a turn 1 Rhystic or a turn 1 Mystic Remora, and an Esper Sentinel, etc., a Kroms, to where there's already something on that table that's making players less keen to trigger draws. And so Ledger Shredder's not going to go off as much, because when it first came out, no one was respecting the Ledger Shredder. I was like making that thing like utterly massive and like drawing like 6 cards. Like it was insane. But like as time went on, people like actually like, you know, somewhat respected it, especially with the other stuff going on. It just basically what it comes down to is slots are tight, and I don't want to overcommit to creatures. That's why you'll also see like Evelyn does specify her or another vampire. I'm not on any other vampires. The 2 that would be in consideration is something, I'm blanking on the one. It's something Neophyte and Volduran Epicure, because both in Volduran Epicure's case, at least, because I have it pulled up. When he ETBs, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. So if something somehow happened to Evelyn, like, or Evelyn, you can't like, you can't cast, like, you can still do the combo and drain that way.
Right. And, you know, so like you were kind of saying there, we've got the specific strategy that we want to get to. We kind of have to start asking ourselves, okay, well, what's like the most efficient way to execute this combo? And if we're like spending more time kind of just like casting vampires and like getting value that way, it's like it can be good, but at the same time, we're kind of diluting what the deck's trying to do, really. So interesting as we're moving up in power levels, focusing less on the vampire stuff, doing more of the I'm trying to win the game type of stuff with like Worldgorger. Not to say that you couldn't do some kind of vampire-based strategy. So yeah, let's move on to our sorceries here. A lot of, you know, pretty stock stuff. Got the Demonic Tutor, Grim Tutor, Imperial Seal. I've been seeing a lot of people moving away from the what's it called? Appear to the Abyss, and they've been running Grim Tutor instead. Seems like a pretty good option. We've got Praetor's Grasp. Search for other people's Thoracle or Consultation if you really need to.
And yeah, like you said, just standard tutor package.
Demonic Betrayal.
Meme bet is so good. I don't
Especially
think
with
I've
the
lost
wheels.
a game where I've resolved it. Yeah, easy, but like even like if there's a tutor in a yard, like sometimes you're set with that, and you can climb back into a game even if you were out of it.
One last thing I do want to talk about here as we're moving on to the instance. I do see the Final Fortune, and now we've got this Warrior's Oath in addition to Last Chance. And these are cards that basically say take an extra turn, and you lose the game at the end of that next instep. I've seen a lot of players like starting to run Final Fortune. I've run Final Fortune in my Naya Dargo deck, and it's actually been like really strong. But now I'm seeing more players are like, you know, let's drink this Kool-Aid. Let's add all 3 of these effects into our decks. And I'm wondering how they've been treating you recently.
It's essentially just another chance to sneak the win in. I think as Commander players, we're all very much used to the if I had one more turn, I win kind of thing. Mostly focusing on Final Fortune now, not the sorcery speed ones as much. And I think you're going to see some neat tricks as you look closer with the instance. Evelyn plays well into instant speed fights. And so if you can also incorporate doing turns off of that, that's amazing. And so that's why I also have I'm on Necropotence. So I normally I really do not like Necropotence, because if you're Necropotencing and passing with nothing else to do and no actual game plan for it, I don't Sure, you can sculpture 7, but I'm a little more wary. I need something more than that. And so having extra turns to make sure, like, whether you don't have any of them in hand and you're hoping you hit the fortune in that pile so you can go to the extra turn, or you're casting the turn spell before you're going to the end step, in the case of the sorcery speed ones, it just gives you a way, additional value to that.
Checking out some of these other, Grixis, or this instant package, for the people that are, that have been watching my channel for a while, you'll see that this is a pretty standard Grixis interaction package for CEDH. We got some of our really hard hitters, Chain of Vapor, Flusterstorm. We got the Force of Negation, Force of Pact of Negation, or Cyclonic Rift. We got the Intuition to set up our Breach combos. A Braid, super great card. One of them that's kind of catching my eye though is this Baleful Mastery.
I was hoping you were going to ask about that. Yeah, because it's very cute.
Okay.
It gives me a way to remove its removal, so it's good for that, especially because like we need to be able to remove like just there's a lot of stuff we want to be able to remove that could potentially disrupt us, Dolphy being one of them. So it does that. It also hits a Planeswalker, which is nice. A few people still play like Narset and stuff like that.
Karn.
But it has the alternate effect too, where if you pay 1 in black instead of its full cost, you still exile the target creature, Planeswalker, but an opponent draws a card, and it's not may, it's a must. So if they went for Thoracle, you can do your loop over top, and then you make them draw.
Yeah, thing. But yeah, I've seen mono black decks on Baleful Mastery, and I think that was like the main reason was to like hit the Thoracle, and like force them to draw, kind of like the connive thing we were talking about earlier. We're in Grixis, we have access to so many colors, so to see Baleful Mastery in this context is seems really interesting. But yeah, I like the thought process. Hits arguably one of the better win cons in the format. So. But yeah, other than that, like I already said, it's a pretty stock Grixis removal package. Reign of Filth is another card that really stands out since this is a turbo style of deck where you can sack your lands, black mana. Really lets you like go all in with like the Hail Mary type of play.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to talk about? Oh, sorry.
It's funny you mentioned that one because like I've actually found like just optimizing lists and stuff and playing like less and less lands to where Reign of Filth is one of those cards that like a couple years ago was like crazy for acceleration, and I think we have enough that it's not 100% necessary, and I've kind of talked myself out of it a little bit with like the acceleration of even particular of how few lands you need to really get the thing off. And so that's something that might make way for like another counterspell or something. I'll give you the first little hint of some new spicy tech we've been thinking about, which also I think talks to the extent at which Red has become a powerhouse in the format of actually starting to consider genuinely no memes, legitimately start considering slotting in like Blue Elemental Blast or Hydro Blast. You can see how like this is my like really turbo control package, but like not super greedy control package. You can always tell where that distinction is if you start to see like Days and Friends start coming in.
There's so many times at CEDH when mana's just tight. People aren't.
Yeah.
They don't leave that extra mana up. Actually makes me think of running like Mana Tithe for the memes is actually like kind of worth it in non-blue decks. Probably not, but it will definitely catch people off guard.
Well, it's the same reason. Actually, I'm not on it, but we can talk about it in the artifacts. And something else I do want to mention, because I just realized I'm not on it in this list. That's gonna be changing.
Well, let's actually go to the artifacts now. So, as we're moving up in power levels, I've at this point have already released the skirmish version and the battle version of Evelyn, and we'll see here this kind of evolution of how our ramp is functioning here. In the skirmish tier, we had a lot of 3-drop, some 2-drop rocks. Skirmish tier, or sorry, in the battle tier, we've kind of upgraded primarily to 2-drop rocks. You got your soul ring, and then here we've definitely added in our staples more or less with like our 0-drop stuff, Lotus Petal, Mana Crypt, LED for the Underworld Breach shenanigans. What do you want to highlight here?
Yeah, so we're talking about. I'm actually gonna, we're gonna do a little live edit, because I want it in here. It's one of those things, like you maintain a few different lists, you're constantly rotating and playing through them. Sometimes you forget to add a card, but we're talking about how resources are so limited. Defense grid has been a monster in in these decks because that's the one thing the Grixis doesn't have. The one thing I am jealous of other colors for. I play Grixis. We don't get silences.
Nope,
Defense grid though is, with how tight resources are, is essentially a silence, and so it has that same effect. And what makes silences so pivotal and powerful is, even if they have interaction for the silence, they have now used interaction. And the same thing goes with defense grid. It's counter this, fight here on this point right here, or you're not getting to answer again. And so I think it's really powerful, especially with Worldgorger being a risky combo. It of course doesn't really fully protect it because there are points in that loop where it's off the board, but it helps get ready for all of that setup. I would suggest everybody playing Turbo Grixis right now give it a strong consideration. Just use responsibly. Please do not cast defense grid and pass.
Yeah, no, that's definitely what you don't want to do. And I think it's probably one of the strongest play patterns in terms of using cards like Final Fortune, in my opinion, especially if you're in white, is casting Grand Abolisher into Final Fortune. It's 2 white and 2 red to do that, but it's basically like your Final Fortune is now like can't be countered, right? Because you have Grand Abolisher out, and then the entire next turn that you have is like, people essentially can't respond outside of like maybe a CEDHU or an Otawara. So that same kind of play pattern of being able to cast the defense grid and then follow that up with a Final Fortune seems really, really strong.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I think we can move on to the enchantments here, unless there was something else you wanted to highlight.
I think the only thing that might stick out to people is I am on all 3 talismans. I think this is something that like blends nicely with the land base too. It's something you'll see. I think a lot of lists have started to deviate a bit, where you either see decks running like Ancient Tomb, City of Traders, etc., and are on a lot of talismans because simple math. You make 2 colorless. You have lands that easily make 2 colorless. Play more 2 colorless rocks, or they're not on those lands. They're not running those rocks. So I'm choosing to be on all 3.
Let's head down to the enchantments here, and so this is kind of where I want to get into. So when we first started talking about the deck, we introduced this Worldgorger. Can you go through the Worldgorger combo for me and for the viewers?
So you're starting this off with Worldgorger in the bin. That's 6 mana, 6 mana value, I guess we're on, not converted mana cost. Never actually matters. So you started off with it in the bin. You cast 1 of 3 enchantments. Animate Dead and Dance of the Dead there's like a minute difference, I think. But it ultimately doesn't matter. Necromancy, is effectively the same, except there's an option to cast it at instant speed. So you have Worldgorger in the yard, you cast your enchantment. Now you have your cast of your enchantment. Pass priority around. Now you have your ETB. ETB is on the stack, you target Worldgorger Dragon, you return it to the battlefield. Worldgorger Dragon ETB is on the stack now. Assuming that passes around, when it enters, it exiles all other permanents you control, including lands and stuff. So this is the key part here. If you have things untapped, you want that mana. In response to Worldgorger's ETB, you should tap those. Produce your mana. ETB resolves. You exile those permanents, which includes the Animate Dead. And they're not exiled for good, thankfully. They're exiled until Worldgorger leaves the battlefield. So, conveniently, all of those enchantments bury the creature or put the creature in the graveyard. Whatever iteration of magic rules wording you're using, if the enchantment is removed from them. So, enchantment goes away. Worldgorger now needs to go to the yard. Worldgorger leaves the battlefield. LTB triggers, brings back everything, including the Animate Dead effect. Now you can now you start to have you have that Animate Dead effect on board again. Now you see the actual loop where now you keep repeatedly bringing back Worldgorger Dragon, tapping your lands, making your mana, and then eventually the way you break the loop is when Animate Dead comes back, when Worldgorger is in the yard, you target something else and you bring that back instead. You also have everything in your deck, or you have 4 decks, as we've been saying, so you can just bounce the Worldgorger, you can kill it, you can do whatever you want, basically. Just trigger that and you'll get everything back. Not that at that point you need any of your permanents anyway.
Super sweet combo. Like you said before, it's pretty fragile because if you kill the Worldgorger Dragon in response to its ETB trigger, its leave the battlefield trigger will resolve first, and there's nothing exiled with it yet. And then after that resolves, its into the battlefield trigger resolves, and everything gets exiled. And at that point, you have nothing on board. So essentially, it's kind of what we were talking about before, where it's like Grixis adding blue. And this commander specifically really shores up a lot of the weaknesses that this combo has historically had to deal with. So super sweet. And then again, like you said, Necromancy allows you to do this combo at instant speed, so you can potentially win on top of other people's win attempts. We've got our Mystic Remora, we've got Rhystic Study. Both seem pretty stock for CEDH deck that's running blue. Necropotence, we already talked about a little bit. Depending on the deck, this card can be really, really strong. But in this context, since you are on all those Final Fortune type effects, I like this card even more now. I'm going to have to really heavily consider that interaction when I'm brewing Grixis decks for this channel. And then we got 2 more enchantments here. We've got Dress Down, which actually seems really strong, considering the lack of creatures that are in your deck right now. Being able to shut off creature-based strategies for an entire turn, and it has Flash, which just gives you even more control. It lets you play that, land, pass, I'll deal with you on the stack kind of thing that you were talking about earlier. Dress Down seems super sweet in that context. And then we've also got the Underworld Breach, which... just as a reminder for all our viewers, Underworld Breach, essentially what we're going to do is we're going to get our LED or a Lotus Petal and a Brain Freeze, We're going to Brain Freeze ourselves, and we're going to mill our deck a little bit, generally for like 3, depending on how many cards you cast this turn. It could be anywhere from 6 to 9, maybe 12. And then from there, you can use the cards that you milled to recast your LED or your Lotus Petal. Use the extra mana to recast the Brain Freeze from your graveyard with the Underworld Breach. That will continue to fuel itself over and over and over again. And then from that point, you can you've got a lot of different options. You could actually just probably hit your Worldgorger Dragon in the graveyard and then do your Worldgorger combo, or you could mill your entire deck out, cast Oracle, and win that way, or you could just mill out all of your opponents. That's probably the last thing that you would want to be doing. But it is an option. Especially considering you have the Mnemonic Betrayal. So you could just mill everyone out, cast Mnemonic Betrayal, and then, cast someone else's win con. However you want to do that. And moving on to our lands, as I normally talk about in my glory versions of whatever Grixis deck I'm brewing, I like to mention that that we have another Tainted Pact mana base here. And generally, so a Tainted Pact mana base is essentially a mana base where you do not have any lands that are repeating, and that's because Tainted Pact lets you reveal, or you exile top card of your library until you exile another card that has the same name as that card. So if you're running like 2 basics and you hit one of the basics twice, you have to stop milling the card. So if you're trying to win with Thassa's Oracle, where you need to exile your entire library, you need to not have any repeats whatsoever in your deck. And so we've got this Tainted Pact mana base here. The thing that I'm finding really interesting, though, is that there are no basics. And generally, when I'm brewing, I really like to at least have one basic. Is there... I'd be really, interested to hear your thought process on why no basics here.
Absolutely. Because I don't like basics anymore.
Okay.
So no. So like I'm on as I've kind of like I said, I don't ever consider if you consider lists like your baby, right? Like I'm not raising a single child. Like I've got entire like hockey teams worth of little Grixis monsters running around, right?
Right.
And so I'm kind of like messing around as I learn lessons in one, I'm applying it to the other, and my land counts have just been going lower and lower. 27 is actually high for me now. I run 25 in Rog Sai and Armix Crom. I've flirted with the idea of going down that far in Malcolm Smasher, just because as long as you get Malcolm out, you're kind of good to go on mana. Inala's on 26, Cormella's on 27, just because I'm still like fine-tuning the colored fixing of that, because you need so many colored pips. But yeah, so I'm already low on lands, which means those cuts have to come from somewhere, and your duels off limits, your shocks off limits for the same reason. Your fetches, you're gonna be running your fetches. Your rainbow lands, you need your rainbow lands. And then in this case, like I said, I'm on Arcane Signet, Felwar Stone, and the 3 Talisman. So Ancient Tomb and City of Traders. City of Traders is something I wasn't on in a lot of lists initially. I was preferential towards Crystal Vein because you can control when sacrificing happens.
Right.
But I've changed my tune completely. Once you start counting those all up, you're quickly running out of slots. And a land that taps for 1 color, yes, it's a basic, so it gets around some certain things we can talk about, but it starts to become problematic. And so, like, if it's like that over, I don't know, like some sort of dual land, right? Like it starts to get complicated. And there are effects like, but Archon of Emeria non-basic lands come in untapped or tapped. But that's like it. Like I feel like there's still a lot of people specifically that play that kind of like LGS pickup CEDH type games where they're still super worried about like stuff like back to basics, which simply you don't see it much anymore in CEDH. If you see it, like, you can deal with it. You have resources to deal with it. We have a plethora of artifact ramp to deal with it as well.
Right.
So from that standpoint, I'm like, I don't really need the basic.
So yeah, with all those things considered, it makes sense that you kind of cut off on the basic. It's already like a super fast Grixis kind of list anyway. You can't really afford, to have that one like monocolored land sometimes. So yeah, all those things considered, it makes a lot of sense. Do you want to like add anything as we're like closing up this deck tech?
Yeah, the other thing I just have to say is, if anyone wants to chat about the list, I'm always game. You can comment on the list on Moxfield. I try to respond to those when I can. I'm on the Grixis Mean Girls Discord server, moderator, like you said. We also do have an Evelyn chat in the CEDHU server, which is really good. We have a lot of like very good conversations there and try to talk about the minute differences between lists because in CEDH, especially for new players, it's hard to grasp sometimes that like lists can be 8 cards off, and those cards can be instrumentally different in the design of the list. And so you can really take a deep dive there. So yeah, if anyone wants to pop into those spaces and talk, we would be absolutely happy to have you. And the only other thing is I think you had asked me if I could go over this before. Is with the idea of, we've been talking about Turbo Evelyn this whole time, but the idea of a more mid-rangey Evelyn.
Oh yeah, yeah. Wow.
I'm always a little hesitant with that terminology, just because Grixis mid-range, quote unquote, will never be mid-range. It will always be a faster mid-range because you'll be a bit slower than the Turbo list. But if it goes to true mid-game, in that grind game, you're just not going to grind quite as well as the decks that have a Timnang Prom in the command zone, or a Thrasios, or something else that's going to let them really start grinding out the value once they have those engines established. What I've seen here and what's worked for Evelyn is like doing some like cute like Displacer Kitten type stuff. Those decks also are typically slotting in Deflecting Swat and Fierce Guardianship and a Jeweled Lotus, because if you notice those cards are all absent in this list, it's because you really don't need Evelyn until you're using her as the outlet. In a more mid-rangey approach, I think you would be utilizing her and just kind of grinding out that value using other people's cards as leverage. So I think there's room for it. The only, again, I'd advise caution there, because Worldgorger is risky, and now if you're talking about trying to play for the mid game, you want to be able to rebuild if you get stopped. And True. So, and the other thing is, if you're waiting to go off until you're more in that mid game, people have had time to build resources and have answers, and especially, and just leave mana up. So now stuff like Spell Snare, stuff like Defense Grid, Spell Pierce, Miscast, Daze, they aren't all of them now aren't going to work as well because people now have the mana to pay into it. You're not capitalizing on those early build-up turns. And so that's what I think. You can absolutely do it if you really want to. I think Turbo might be a bit stronger, but that's the beauty. Ultimately, CEDH is your decision. If you wanna go one way or the other, you can. And either way, like I said, there's spaces, Grixis Mean Girls and CEDHU, happy to work with anyone with what they want to build. I'll be honest with them, but I'll also try my hardest to optimize to what they really, really want to do.
Right. You know, allow players to, this is something that, you know, I won't do the aside for too long, but in CEDH or in EDH in general, I think what makes this format so great is the ability to express yourself through your deck building. And in CEDH, I think a lot of times we kind of forget that. And it's all about, like, you know, what is the best in like any context. But I still think in CEDH there's room for people to express themselves, at least to a degree. So I heavily, you know, if you want to brew your own type of version, get some inspiration from this list here. I'll have the deck list in the description below. In addition, I will also have links to those Discord servers in the link in this in the description. So yeah, brew your own version. I highly recommend trying out. You know, if you want to try like the Displacer Kit and stuff, I think that sounds awesome. Then, you know, checking out those Discord servers, and you know, Alchmyst is obviously a really cool guy, and he'll put you in the right direction and help you realize your goals for your version of the deck. So I think with that, we'll actually you know, that'll be the end of the deck tech. Alchemist, it was a pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much for you know, explaining the deck, giving us a lot of really great insight into Grixis deck building. And thanks for watching, guys. Until next time.